In a forgotten little town in West Virginia, where the Ohio River reflects flickering lights, something emerged from the shadows in the 1960s. A winged creature with red eyes that cut through the night like hellish headlights. They called it the Mothman, the man-moth. It wasn't just a monster. It was an omen, a warning whispered among the residents of Point Pleasant before tragedy struck them. In this video, I'll take you through 5 real encounters with this mysterious figure, stories that defy reason and echo like dark prophecies. Turn off the lights, adjust the volume, and come with me, because sometimes what flies in the darkness is closer than you think. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, November 1966. A small town, nestled between dense hills and the Ohio River, where life moved quietly, until something changed. On the night of the 15th, 2 couples driving through an abandoned area called the TNT area, a former World War II munitions depot, saw something they would never forget. A tall figure with wings folded like those of a giant bird stood in the road, but it wasn't a bird. Its eyes glowed, red and hypnotic like lanterns cutting through the fog. They hit the gas and fled, but what they called the Mothman had already etched its name into history. In the days that followed, more sightings were reported. A worker saw the creature hovering over a bridge. A mother swore it stood outside her child's bedroom window, just watching. Always the same details. A silhouette over 2 meters tall, dark wings that opened with a dry sound, and those eyes. Eyes that seemed to see through the soul. But the Mothman wasn't just an apparition. It came with signs. Phones rang with static. Radios crackled for no reason. Dogs barked at nothing. Some said they felt a weight in the air, as if an invisible storm was approaching. Then, on December 15th, 1967, tragedy struck. The Silver Bridge, connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, collapsed during rush hour, sending 46 people into the icy waters of the river. Cars sank, metal groaned, and chaos took over. After that, the Mothman Sightings stopped, as if it had fulfilled its role. The townspeople began to whisper. Was it warning them, or did it bring the disaster? Theorists point to the region's past. The TNT area, full of abandoned bunkers, was said to be a place of strange experiments. Others speak of an older curse tied to the indigenous lands that existed there before. The Shawnee, who once inhabited the area, told stories of winged spirits, messengers of catastrophic change. But the Mothman didn't stay confined to 1967. Since then, it has appeared before other disasters, fires, collapses, even 9/11, according to some. A dark prophet or a silent observer? No one knows for sure. What we know comes from those who saw it, ordinary men and women whose lives were forever changed after meeting its red gaze. And now, I'll tell you 5 of those stories. Real accounts, straight from the shadows of Point Pleasant and beyond. Our first account takes us to ground zero of the legend, the TNT area in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It was the night of November 15th, 1966, and 2 couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Mallet, decided to take a drive along the deserted roads near the old munitions bunkers. The place already had a reputation for being haunted, with its moss-covered, rusted door buildings. But the 4 of them, all in their 20s, were more interested in adventure than fear. That changed when the headlights of Roger's '57 Chevy illuminated something on the side of the road. It was a tall figure, over 2 meters high, standing there like a statue. Dark wings folded against its back, trembled slightly, and its body seemed human, but wrong. Then it turned its head. 2 red eyes glowing like spotlights locked onto them. Linda screamed, grabbing Roger's arm, while Steve in the back seat muttered, "What is that?" Roger hit the gas, the tires screeching against the gravel, but the car's radio started to crackle, a loud, piercing static that wouldn't stop. They looked in the rearview mirror and saw it. The thing spread its wings, as wide as the car's hood, and took flight, chasing after them. The car reached nearly 160 kilometers per hour, an insane speed for those winding roads. But the Mothman didn't fall behind. It flew low, keeping pace with the Chevy, its red eyes visible in the dark like demonic headlights. Mary later said she heard a sound coming from it, a high-pitched screech like metal scraping metal that made her ears ache. They finally reached town, sweating and shaking, and ran to the police station. The sheriff listened to their story, skeptical but noticed something strange. The car's hood had marks, as if claws had scratched it. The four of them swore it wasn't a bird or a plane. "It saw us," Linda said in an interview days later. "And I think it wanted us to know that." Our second account takes us to the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, weeks before its tragic collapse. It was early December 1967, and Thomas Eerie, a 38-year-old salesman, drove his car across the bridge almost every night, returning from work in Ohio to his home in West Virginia. Thomas was a practical man, not prone to superstitions, but on that cold night of December 2nd, he felt something different. The air felt heavy, and the bridge's support beams trembled with a vibration he couldn't explain. That's when he looked up and saw it. Near one of the bridge's towers, a dark figure hovered, motionless in the air. It was tall, with wide wings that didn't flap, as if defying gravity. Its red eyes glowed intensely, fixed on Thomas's car. He slammed on the brakes, his heart racing, and for a moment, man and creature stared at each other. The car's radio, which had been off, turned on by itself, emitting a loud static mixed with fragments of voices, like a distant chorus he couldn't understand. Thomas later said he felt a wave of pure fear, as if he knew something terrible was coming. Then, the figure moved. It didn't fly, but glided through the air, passing over the car's hood and disappearing into the darkness on the other side of the bridge. Thomas sat frozen, the engine still running, until another car honked behind him, snapping him back to reality. He drove home in silence but couldn't sleep that night. Days later, on December 15th, the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. Thomas wasn't on the bridge that day, but he never forgot those eyes. In an interview years later, he said, "I know what I saw, and I know it knew what was going to happen." For Thomas, the Mothman wasn't just a creature. It was a warning he didn't know how to heed. Our third account took place in Point Pleasant at the height of the Mothman Sightings on November 20th, 1966. Connie Carpenter, a 19-year-old woman, lived with her parents in a modest house on the outskirts of town, near the forests surrounding the Ohio River. Connie was known for being calm, someone who enjoyed reading at night with the window slightly open to feel the breeze. But that night, as she turned the pages of her book, she heard something, a dry sound, like wings tapping against the glass. She looked up and froze. Outside, just inches from the window, was a dark figure. Tall, with broad shoulders and wings that folded against its back like an old coat, the creature seemed to peer inside. Its eyes were what struck her the most. Red, glowing, so intense that Connie said it felt like they were burning through her. She dropped the book, her heart racing, as the thing remained there, motionless, just watching. The radio in the kitchen, which had been playing soft music, began to crackle, emitting a loud static that made the neighborhood dogs bark like mad. Connie screamed for her parents, but before they arrived, the figure spread its wings, wide, dark, almost blocking the streetlight, and took off with a screech that echoed through the house. When her father, Bill, ran outside with a flashlight, there was nothing but marks on the windowsill, long scratches as if claws had gripped there. Connie spent days without sleeping, swearing she could still feel those eyes on her, even when she was alone. Weeks later, she learned of the Silver Bridge collapse, and a cold certainty hit her. "It was warning me," she told a local reporter, "or maybe it just wanted me to see." Our fourth account takes us back to Point Pleasant in late November 1966, when Mothman sightings were at their peak. Frank Dawson, a 45-year-old factory worker, was on the night shift at a chemical plant on the banks of the Ohio River. It was November 28th, and Frank was used to the solitude of those dark hours, monitoring the machines while the town slept. Around 2 in the morning, he stepped outside for a break, lighting a cigarette near the fence that separated the factory from the nearby woods. That's when he heard a sound, a heavy flapping of wings coming from above. Frank looked up at the sky and saw a silhouette against the factory lights. It was a winged figure, hovering about 15 meters off the ground, with dark wings that stretched out like living shadows. Its red eyes glowed, fixed on him, and for a moment he felt the air turn icy, as if all life had been sucked out of the environment. The factory lights flickered, some bulbs bursting with loud pops, while the pocket radio he carried began emitting static mixed with a high-pitched whine. Frank dropped his cigarette, his body frozen as the creature glided through the air, passing so close that he felt the wind from its wings on his face. The thing didn't attack. It just flew, circling the factory once before rising and disappearing toward the river. Frank ran inside, calling for the supervisor, but when the two of them returned, there was nothing. Just the smell of sulfur in the air and strange marks on the fence, as if something had landed there. The next morning, he learned that other workers had seen lights flickering at the same time, and a truck on the nearby road had stalled for no reason. Less than a month later, the Silver Bridge collapsed. Frank never returned to the night shift. I don't know what it wanted, he told a friend years later, but I know it wasn't human. Our fifth account takes us to a rural road near Point Pleasant on the night of December 10th, 1967, just 5 days before the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Mary Heyer, a 54-year-old local reporter, was driving home after investigating Mothman sightings for the town newspaper. Mary was a well-known figure, determined to separate fact from fiction, but that night she became part of the story. Around 10 at night, as she drove her blue Pontiac along Route 62, the radio began to fail. The country music turned to static, and then a voice emerged from the noise. "Mary, stop." It was her own voice, like an impossible echo. Confused, she slowed down, the headlights cutting through the fog rising from the nearby river. That's when she saw something ahead, blocking the road. A tall figure with wings folded against its back stood there, its red eyes glowing like headlights in the darkness. Mary hit the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just meters away from the creature. She later said she felt a buzzing in her ears, as if the air was vibrating, while the Mothman slowly spread its wings, revealing a span that covered the width of the road. It didn't move toward her, it just stood there, staring, as the radio continued to repeat, "It's going to fall! It's going to fall!" Mary gripped the steering wheel, her body trembling, as the creature took off with a sharp screech that made the car windows vibrate. She watched it rise, a shadow against the sky, before disappearing in the direction of the Silver Bridge. When the sound stopped, the radio returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Mary drove home, jotting everything down in her notebook with shaking hands. 5 days later, when the bridge collapsed, she connected the dots. "It was trying to tell me something," she wrote in an article she never published, "but I don't know if it was a warning or a sentence." Mary passed away 2 years later, but those who knew her say she never stopped looking at the sky. 5 encounters. 5 lives marked by a winged shadow that doesn't explain itself but leaves an indelible mark. A couple fleeing the TNT area, a man on a bridge about to collapse, a young woman watched through her window, a worker under flickering lights, a reporter hearing her own voice in the darkness. Each saw the red eyes, felt the weight of something greater, heard the screech that echoes like a scream from beyond. But what is the Mothman? A creature of flesh and blood, lost in the forests of West Virginia. a vengeful spirit born from the ruins of the TNT area, or the curses of a forgotten past, or something more, a messenger, a harbinger of disasters we don't yet understand. Point Pleasant wasn't the end. Since 1967, reports of the Mothman have emerged before tragedies around the world. A fire in Chicago, an earthquake in Mexico, even the events of September 11th, some say. Always the same signs: radios failing, lights flickering, a silence that suffocates before chaos. Those who've seen it speak of a strange feeling, as if it knows something we don't. Skeptics point to owls, cranes, tricks of light in the fog. But how do you explain the voices, the machines that die, the bridges that fall? How do you explain the eyes that seem to carry the weight of an inevitable future? For the people of Point Pleasant, the Mothman is more than a legend. It's a scar, a reminder etched into the town's memory. But its shadow stretches further, looming over us like an unanswered question. Does it warn to save us, or does it simply watch as we fall? Perhaps the truth lies in those red eyes, glowing in the night, waiting for someone to dare look back. The lights of Point Pleasant still shine over the Ohio River, but the shadows never fade. The Mothman lingers there between myth and memory, a winged enigma that dares us to understand. Its red eyes are not just a warning, they are a mirror, reflecting what we fear and what we cannot foresee. So, the next time you cross a bridge at night or hear a radio crackling for no reason, pay attention. If you feel a chill you can't explain, or see a shadow that doesn't belong in the sky, it might be there, watching, waiting, and who knows what it sees in our future. Have you ever seen something strange in the sky? Ever felt a premonition you couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments. I want to know what you think of the Mothman. A prophet? A monster? Or just a shadow of our minds? Subscribe for more tales that will make you question the darkness. And until next time, keep your eyes open. It might be closer than you think.